Well, why look to China now? I mean, this slide's been up here for a while in this presentation, but I mean, with tariffs the way that they are, and we're not expecting any stabilization to this, like I said, I think not only is there a massively robust market in China for some of the categories that we're going to talk to, but it does provide a very good base of operations, like we said, for Asia. So even if you're getting your product produced in China, which a lot of European SMEs are, and that was all of a sudden, destined for the States. Now you understand you've got a 40% tariff to deal with. Well, China provides the infrastructure to quickly pivot and potentially find a new market for that. Primarily, that might be in China, but if it's not, there might be some good infrastructure for you to move that into Southeast Asia, Korea, or Japan as well. Just a rough overview of the market, and this slide on the right can probably change on a monthly basis because this is a fast and dynamic moving market here. But the overall e-commerce market in China is estimated at about 2.68 trillion US dollars, which is by far the largest e-commerce market in the world. When we add up the rest of the regions in Asia, like we talked about, Korea, Southeast Asia, Japan all together, it barely gets to about half of what's going on in just China alone. Penetration rates in terms of mobile shopping are incredible. And now we're at the point where mobile is actually so strong here that many people have opted to actually skip their websites altogether and desktop versions. And they're certainly not suffering for that. So we think that roughly China has about a 50% share of all global online transactions, which is incredible. And that's growth that's really been seen over the last 4 or 5 years. The demographics, one of the stats that I use a lot is it is primarily female driven here, 26 to 35. But to give an understanding about how female driven the market is in China, there's a stat that I always think is very powerful. And it has to do with clothing. So women's clothing, I think we can all guess that that's 99% bought by women online. But men's clothing, does anybody want to take a guess at what the percentage of men's clothing that is bought by women online? 72%. 72% of men's clothing is bought by women online as well, too. So we can talk a little bit about the platforms. Some skew further towards women than others, like Rednote or Redbook, and some skew a little bit more towards men, like JD, who dominates a little bit more in the 3C categories. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these categories here, too. So these are some massive sectors that are growing really, really fast still. So beauty, north of $80 billion, fashion, $280 billion and growing, nutraceutical and pet. So we're actually having a pretty good year in 2025 for mother baby. And that's even despite it being year of the snake. We could normally see patterns around dragon years. But there's always that inverted relationship that we see between a rising pet spend and actually a rising mother baby spend. So while we may not be seeing an increase in births under mother baby, we actually still are seeing families willing to spend a lot more money on that individual child. So we see that the actual ticket price or the basket size heading way up. A sport and outdoor, this one is a massively growing category right now. And we're seeing some numbers that have been announced from Arc'teryx after they went public. Really interested in these, where they were reporting Q1 being up 57%. And that's not coming from a point of zero. They were already a top 5 brand in the category before. Yoga apparel, people taking better care of themselves. So if you were to look at these 5 sectors together, what I would try to say to sum this up is look good, feel good. And I think that is really a change in consumption. So you might hear people talking about, hey, LVMH is down, the economy's down, and people drawing that false parallel between those two. That's actually not what's happening. It is a different consumer. We talk about the 26 to 35-year-old, and this consumer has really emerged coming out of COVID to become the dominant force in China. They're traveling way more. If you look at those numbers, experiences are way up. They're taking better care of themselves. And these are trends that have been actually just increasing in rates. Nutraceuticals being a big one from Europe now too as well, expecting that to hit 20 billion US dollars next year. So very, very big categories. When we talk about the consumer journey, we look over a couple of the platforms that we made, but when you look at Tmall, JD, and even PDD, and they really become what we would call sort of search bar platforms. I mean, there was some category pages where people could putz, but a lot of times with Tmall is people were going with the predetermined purchasing intent. And they had really good advantage because in China, everything is online payments, even offline stores. So WeChat and Tmall really dominated with people's behavior. Now, since then, the government's changed some rules a little bit, but the damage is basically done. So why you see massive amounts of online sales compared to retail and a lot of retail shops going under or being subsidized by the government is because Alipay and WeChat Pay knew this. So Alipay, owned by Alibaba, would know if you were going and buying a pair of pants every 6 months, for example, in an offline store. Well, what kind of ads do you think they're going to feed you 5.5 months after you bought your last pair of pants? So that really drove a lot of the shift into online, which is a little bit different than some of the other markets. Japan has 50 different payment gateways where the data is not quite amalgamated like it was in China, but that really set it up for really total domination in terms of e-commerce. So where we're seeing, retail growth being kind of flattered down a little bit, we're still in low double digits in terms of online growth. And that's already more than 50% of consumption in China anyway. So we expect this to continue. Closed loop, I think I might use infinity loop here to talk about this, but we're going to go through a couple of the ways that this works. So live streaming, which is a big thing in China, really started in China. We all know, I think, some of the big streamers like Li Jiaqi or the Lipstick King from 5 or 6 years ago, and Via being big streamers. She being so popular that I compare this, but she was the ones doing cameos inside feature dramas, for example, as opposed to maybe celebrities coming on your live stream. She was actually more popular than A-list actors and had bigger followings and really incredible. I mean, most business schools now are studying these phenomenons that are coming out of China. We all know about the tax evasion issues, but there's now new celebrities that have come up there. So one of the main things is live streaming. Walmart in the United States actually last year reported they did $40 billion US in live streaming sales. So this is going to be going on globally. I think that, using also Lululemon as an example, they're sending executive teams into China now to understand what goes on here because these trends, we've seen it again and again. They're starting in China and they're propagating to other parts of the world. TikTok in the UK doing really well in terms of live stream video. Short form videos also, now you can see those on product pages. You can see those throughout Douyin, TikTok, really good marketing campaigns, and then how the design works in your storefront. So awareness, consideration, and then the transactions, those reviews that are going to be read by future customers, allowing that to go viral a little bit. And then some actions that you're taking with your consumers, especially around loyalty programs, to really sort of complete that loop and hopefully to really expand that base as it goes forward. But, in terms of creating that content with live streaming and short form video, it is a heck of a lot easier to do that than it is to go buy, a couple $100 million worth of ads throughout TV and outdoor in China. So this is really, I think, where the field has been leveled for a lot of SMEs that they're coming into the market here. These are some of the numbers. Tmall has stopped releasing GMV numbers. We expect that they're probably growing around 10 to 12%, maybe a little bit higher this year just because of some of the innovation that they've done. But 939 million, to us, that is going to be saturation. We're not going to see a daily active users or monthly active users. They used to use this as their primary metric until they really kind of got everybody. I mean, at this point, you're talking about people in their 70s or under 8 years old, I think, or some of the only people not using this are incarcerated. Other than that, I think most people have been on Tmall at least once. Post-90s generation, and we talk about that age group before, that's like getting to these late 20s, early 30s. That is really at the center of peak consumption. So looking at what their behaviors are, looking at what the trends and what the interests are, people a little bit younger than that, they're going to get into that group. And that's people who have been in their careers about 4 or 5 years out of college. They've got good spending power. It's a little bit before they're going to have kids in general, but maybe getting into that marriage. So it's really peak consumption that we look at. That sort of 28, I think, out of that group would be the absolute tip of that peak. We're seeing the walled gardens go down. We talk about Alipay. Alipay also being one of the preferred payment methods for retail outlets now too. As people in this room know, and the Europeans should know, cash is just not used. I kind of got out of that habit of carrying cash just this year, but I kept, I think, the same 20 bills in my back pocket of my jeans for probably 6 or 7 months. And I noticed I had that cash in there for so long it started to turn blue, because it was just unused, so you're keeping it for emergencies only. But good luck even going to a Starbucks and trying to figure out how to take even, a 100 renminbi note right now. And that really goes back into that data system. So all of people's consumption habits are going into these AI algorithms. So suggestions on your online purchases are coming from your offline behavior as well. JD is probably the platform that skews not totally towards men, but you've got a little bit more men to women ratio on this platform. So 3C being really good. We're talking about 620 billion, which, is getting towards about half, roughly, if you looked at the overall Alibaba ecosystem. And that's pretty good. They were a third for a long time and they really struggled, but they tried to get in and compete in fashion and more in makeup and cosmetics. That didn't work really well. They went back to their course. They do well in musical instruments. They do great on mobile phones and things like that. So the 3C categories and things that might skew a little bit towards men would actually make purchases. JD is still doing really well for that. Another thing that JD is known for is a really robust logistics network. Next day, same day delivery, the Daojia app, which has gone offline to online and reverse, really putting an infrastructure around retail stores, being able to take orders online and get something to your house from those stores in about an hour. So there's really sort of no aspect of, certainly tier 1 cities, I would say they skew to a little bit more as well. There's really no aspect, I think, of commerce that JD hasn't dabbled into. And I think, people have probably also seen they actually have retail stores themselves, but so much of that is kind of hidden in a way, a part of their logistics network. This is the big one. This is a platform, Redbook, used to be known by Rednote abroad, that skews very towards female, but that 3-to-7 ratio is getting better because it used to be like 1-to-9. Their active users are going, and it's really an incredible platform. Just a little anecdote. I mean, I remember in just being back home with my in-laws and my brother-in-law in Vancouver last year. And, I'm looking on the internet for things to do, and I haven't spent a lot of time in my hometown in 15 years. But when he went on Redbook, he could show me what to do in Vancouver better than I could show him what to do in Vancouver. There really was so much user-generated content there. And I think that's something that's really unique to China. Just the amount of sharing that goes on and the effort that's put into some of these posts, beautiful pictures, great write-ups, and places that I'd totally forgotten about. So I mean, I will be using Redbook in Chinese when I'm back for stuff to do, and even in my own country. And maybe we should be better at that, but I'm happy that this platform exists. It's really great. They've dabbled into actual commerce before, but the influencers and the way that they work, we still really are seeing a lot of the awareness being done on Redbook, but the purchases going on in either Douyin or Tmall. We are expecting that to change. If you follow what they're doing as a company, they've really started to headhunt and poach a lot of top executives from those big platforms. They're making a really, really big push into getting that consumer to actually make that purchase on these platforms. So while it's getting to be a little bit more expensive to engage, a lot of that content is really timeless and it lasts for a really, really long time. And I don't think there's actually too many cases I could name you that have very successful e-commerce programs that don't have a very robust strategy on little Redbook. So 80 million active content creators, that's really good too as well, because it spreads out the amount of influencers. And there's probably somebody that's going to fit your budget, or maybe you don't have you don't have the ability to go viral as an SME. You could maybe only put 3, 4, 5 million euros worth of inventory in the market. There's probably an influencer that's going to fit for you at the size and audience that you're looking for. Also, there's people that specialize in pets, people specialize in all different levels of fashion, outdoor activities, you name it. And the overall ecosystem is getting a lot easier to engage with these influencers. A little bit, I think I'm getting out of time, so I will share this deck too. And in addition, our website has got a lot of guides on this, but just ensure you have recommended content, the same, as all the other social media. Once you start to digest certain topics, they can get a really good profile of you. So just based on what you're surfing and what you're consuming, they can probably have your gender within a day or two, and your age, and probably what you do for a living and your interests. So they're really good at now matching that up and giving you suggestions. So we talked about that search bar before. Well, now they might know that, hey, somebody who buys suits might also more likely be into white wine, for example, or Chinese wine. They've made those connections based on the profile. So a totally different category, but because other people have gone down those different content webs, Redbook and Douyin both do a really, really good job of this. So yeah, go-to search engine for lifestyle. So we've talked a little bit about this, but yeah, I mean, it's not even just for China. I really want to emphasize that Redbook's all over Asia, it's all over Europe, and it's all over North America too. And I recommend maybe, if you've got some Chinese colleagues, getting to take a look at what's even available in your neighborhood. People in a lot of retail outlets in the US, and especially where there's a large Chinese diaspora, have really started to advertise locally overseas using Redbook as well. So we're pretty excited to see what this platform is going to do. And I think the more effort that you put into it now, the more the benefits that you're going to reap in the future. Douyin, we can't really not talk about this one. There is a little typo in here. It's 490 billion in GMV. A little late to fix that, apologies. But this one is by far the fastest growing platform. Just a little bit different in terms of strategy. And I want to emphasize that this is a great platform for moving a lot of top line revenue, but their fees and commissions are by far some of the highest in the industry. So you can have influencers, especially in the two categories of beauty and nutraceuticals, that could be charging you 50% of sales. So they'll use a cost per sale model, but it's very high. And then out of those 50 points, Douyin's going to take about 20 of them. Comparatively to Tmall, the highest fees that Tmall is ever going to charge is around 10%, and most categories sit around that 4 to 6% mark. However, nobody is better at Douyin for being able to put your product instantaneously in front of 5 to 6 million people. And it's not just 5 to 6 million people that are watching content. They have a lot of these live shopping channels where people are going to buy. So I compare this to really mimicking that mall experience. So we're not going to Tmall and searching for a red shirt because I wanted to buy a red shirt. We're going onto Douyin, not necessarily knowing what I'm going to buy, but I know that, this influencer does really well with, let's say 28-year-old females. And I've got a product, a new cosmetic I think is going to do really well with 28-year-old females. And I want to get maybe 500,000 units out in 45 minutes. Douyin can absolutely do that for you. You just might not have a lot of margin. But if you believe in your product and you can work in what we call a long-term value calculation, you'll see this LTV a lot in e-commerce that says, hey, I know my product's really good. I know it's superior. I'm going to go ahead and break even on that first influencer because I know they're going to potentially come back to my Tmall store or back to my Douyin store for that second, third, and fourth purchase. And when you work in these type of calculations, Douyin can actually become a really interesting of your strategy. And again, because it's a CPS model, it doesn't require a lot of upfront spend. So you could get into somebody that maybe has 10, 15, 20 million subscribers. You could also get to somebody who's got maybe 500,000 if you're a little bit more niche. So, and there's a back end that makes it really easy for you to find those people. Self live streaming too. I mean, this is what we're talking about now. Major brands that are starting to build up their popularity with some of the more famous influencers that you see there, that we work with quite a bit. But we also, have 15 or 16 studios where we're broadcasting, around the clock. And not only are we actually broadcasting our own celebrities, but we can now use generative AI, which we're doing pretty effectively, to now take some of our top streamers that could push out 4 or 5 hours a day, which itself is amazing, and really clone their behavior to get them out to potentially 300 hours a day. And with more compute, we can even increase those numbers. So you're going to have a very hard time to build up your streams, but if you're using these bigger influencers, you're casting a net to catch those users to come back that second and third time, because your products are not going to be available for sale outside of that stream that you've hired them to do. So this is an important part of strategy. Apple's doing this now. Microsoft is doing this. And they're doing it in China, where they were very adverse to doing this in any other part of the world. They looked at it like home shopping. They felt in a lot of cases with foreigners, it would cheapen the brand, but assure you that it doesn't. And this is where your demographic sits right now. So if you can create interesting content, and some of the things that we're doing, to sort of stay ahead of the curve, if you look at those two examples up there, most of them are done in studios with green screens behind them. But we're also trying to take these studios out. We're trying to do them outdoors, do them in malls. We've done some crazy things like even do them on motorcycle rides. A lot of that pet category, we really want to be immersed with animals, when you're doing those streams. So be creative. There's a lot of streams out there. We talked about that 80 million number of content creators. So if you've got a really good idea, and one of the things that's worked really well for us is to take some of these popular streamers and bring them to various parts of the world. So we've had 3 pretty successful ones. One of them was taking them to Switzerland for milk formula brand, another one to Australia to showcase beef. We brought another one to a nutraceutical facility in Canada, and these went really, really well. And we actually found that people were engaged in these streams for a couple of hours, which is really, really good because in a lot of cases, this goes very, very quickly. But the longer that you can engage, we can obviously increase that LTV and get those customers coming back and more and more. And again, we talk about leveling the playing field. This doesn't necessarily mean that, you have to just stick to the top 10 or 15 influencers, which I think is a lot of what Instagram, the problem with there is that, a lot of that viral content is coming from a lot of the big guys. But TikTok and what they're famous for is the algorithm that puts content from new streamers, new content creators in front of people, and how they engage with that really determines how that content is going to be pushed forward. So a great stat is, 30% of viral posts in 2023 came from accounts with less than 100,000 followers. So, I mean, the economics of that are really, really good for SMEs. WeChat, this I think is often misunderstood, but it is a payment gateway. It's got great data. The mini app program is where a lot of the commerce goes on, happens to be, in my opinion, one of the best platforms for loyalty. So as Tmall and Douyin have really helped to introduce customers to you, bring them into a mini program, gets you a lot more information about them, and allows you to push a lot more content out to them, special deals, maybe you want to drop releases on certain times. There's a lot of flexibility. It's basically like your own app built into that system. WeChat groups, private shopping groups, all really, really good. And this is an app that is ever increasingly going global. Doesn't matter where I am in the world, I'm still surprised the amount of people that have WeChat, and it's envied by, I think, a lot, by the executives at Facebook and X and Twitter, and I think everybody has their eye on WeChat and very impressed with what they've been able to pull off. I'm running out of time, and I'm going to share this deck, and also our website at wpic.co has got not only its case studies and slides, but videos with the actual clients talking about the process. But really quickly, this is a great SME from Europe, out of Belgium, that really dominates and changed earplugs and solved the issue of hearing loss. But being able to connect all of Asia together, as opposed to just dealing with tiny little agencies and markets, just sales took off gangbusters in terms of what they were able to do by looking at the market as a whole, as opposed to just a bunch of one-off setups. And we're not going to get into this today too, but there also is, when we talk about, there's a lot of, Korean influencers, for example, when you have investments into Korea, that does permeate into China as well. And there's also Chinese influencers that permeate into these other markets. So when you look at the whole region as a whole and what you're doing with influencers and social media content, you can actually benefit quite a bit from the celebrity sharing, shall we say, that goes on in these markets, which is really why, and again, with the logistics networks being able to leave inventory in bonded free trade zones, but get it from Nanjing. With the Shenzhen system especially, if products are now ordered in Thailand and before 4 p.m., that product just following logistics train is going to be in Shenzhen by around 11 p.m. that same night. And then it's going to be on one of 7 or 8 flights throughout Asia, through the night, really being at almost every single capital by 9 a.m. the next morning. So we can say an order placed in Bangkok by 3 p.m. could have started in China and been in the Bangkok postal system by about 9:30 a.m. the next day, which again solves 2 major problems. It's a lot cheaper because it's heavily subsidized in China. And 2, you don't have to have 9 different facilities, and you don't need to have inventory for all these individual markets. As behavior changes, you can move products around, you can relabel it essentially too to be compliant with those markets. And this is one great story that really utilized that system that exists here in Asia. These are all available on our website, and I'll just leave some contact information up over here. And anybody who wants, the website is wpic.co. There are 30 case studies. I'm sure there's probably something that fits your industry, and not just written case studies. Really watch those videos and talk about how that brand went through that process, and how it impacted their business.